2015, I did a thing. I did something that scared me, something that excited me, something that was unknown to me. In 2015, I published a book. That book was called Wrapped in Skin. And from that day, it has changed my life consistently. Almost daily, it has affected me. And my hope is that everyone who's picked the book up from that time has had some impact, been impacted in some way by the words on those pages. This is an opportunity for us to unpack those concepts, to really dive deep. You'll get a front row seat to hear me talk to people about what it is to live a life of purpose. What is existence? What is life itself? Why are we here? You'll get to ask your questions, have comments heard and talked about on the show. And maybe at some point, some of you will have an opportunity to come on and talk about your own personal experience and your own life's journey. My name is Justin Jamar Grooms, and I want to welcome you to Wrapped, the podcast. What's up, good people? This is Justin Jamar back with another episode of the Wrapped in Skin podcast. Thank you for checking me out wherever you listen to this, on whatever platform you listen to it on. Hopefully you've been blessed, as I always say, by the last couple of episodes. I got back to my roots last episode and went back with another solo podcast. So if you haven't listened to that episode, it's short, 25 minutes. Go check it out. It's called It's Just My Ego Talking. So go check it out, listen to it, give us your feedback, let us know what you think. But today, I'm back with another guest, and I'm really excited about this person because, as I say before, my guests are either usually people that I've had a long-standing relationship with or someone I've just met. And what this podcast has started me to do is really, when I meet people, I start thinking automatically, could this be a good guest for the podcast? And this person, when we met, we were introduced, and come to find out, I don't know if she knows this, but we've got a lot of people in common. I do believe in 6 degrees of separation, and that definitely is playing out with her. We got a lot of connections that we share, mutual acquaintances. So today I'm talking to Sharon Youngblood, and we're just gonna dive into some stuff and see what she's willing to talk about, what she's willing to share with us, and what she's gonna withhold from us. Hopefully she'll spill the beans on everything. But
I'm not going to
no,
roll
Sharon,
it.
welcome to Wrapped in Skin. Welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is going to
Yeah.
be great. Who do we know? I'm curious.
Well, I don't want to say their names on here. They may
Well, yeah.
not want their name. We'll talk about it afterwards. We do share a lot of people in common. As I was doing my research on you, I was like, oh, I know that person. I know that person.
Yeah.
So a lot of people we share in common, but I'm sure we may weave them into the conversation. I may change their names to protect their identity. But, so how you doing? How's everything going?
Good. Life is good right now. It's
That's
definitely a lot
good.
of transition. I feel like this year feels I feel like it started off a bit different than I think a lot of people expected. Like when I talk to a lot of my friends and people, like just other creatives and stuff like that, I think for me personally, the momentum I had from 2023, I was hoping was going to go into 2024, and it was like, oh no, not so much. So it's been interesting to navigate,
Yeah,
but at the same time, I still feel like anticipation about what's coming this year because I still feel like great things are coming
I
this
love it. I
year.
love it. It's interesting, and then I'll give you accolades and kind of what you do. But it's interesting you say that because I often talk about being prisoners to the calendar. Like I feel like either
Mm,
if you've had a bad end to the previous year, you want to change that. If you've had a good year to the end of the previous year, you want to continue that.
mhm.
And it's like I think sometimes we fool ourselves into thinking that whatever happened last year is going to continue, or whatever happened last year is not going to continue. So, and it's just not taken day by day. And I think we should just all take it day by day. But that's a soapbox for
Yeah, I was
another time.
we
Yeah,
can definitely go there, but we won't. But yes, I
yeah. No, but so you're a singer, you're a
agree.
songwriter, you're a model. What are your accolades? You're a vocal coach, you're a mentor,
Yes.
and what I really like that you call yourself or that you talk about is you say you're a worshiper.
Mm.
And I think that's interesting to put in your bio. Like a lot of people say that, but
Why is it?
to put it in your bio, because I mean, I think first of all, I don't know that a lot of people really understand what that means, what it means to be a worshiper.
Mm.
Um, and so I kind of want to start right there. All the things that you are, and to attach that to it. And I think that was the first thing you said. Why is that the first of all, is that the most important thing that you do?
Huh.
And if so, why is it the most important thing?
That's interesting because now I have a question for you. But
Well, you
it,
got to answer my question first. You
I
can't
know,
just
right?
answer my
No,
question
I
with a
know.
question.
It is important for me. I think it's first because it is the core, the anchor of who I am. And so everything stems from, I believe, the place and the calling that I have as a worshiper. Um, but I think that worshiper can be something that you do for a living. It can be your creativity, but I also think that there can be worshipers that don't sing
Hmm.
at all. And for me, it's just position of my heart towards God. Like the way I see Him, the way that I experience Him. I love to reverence Him. I'm definitely a vertical worshiper. I and like everything a part of my being is, I feel like, made to worship God. So to me, everything I do comes from that. So all of
Yeah.
those commas that I have, it starts with that heart posture. You know what I mean? It starts from my anchor, which is God, which is where I draw my strength and all of things
Hmm.
from.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that for multiple reasons, and that's the reason I kind of want to talk about that because you know, I don't just assume when you say worshiper that you mean singer,
Hmm.
right? There's to your point, there's people who can be worshipers and aren't singers, and
Hmm.
people who are singers and aren't worshipers. So I wanted to kind of make that distinction between the two. And you did mention something interesting that about that being your anchor point, right? And um, I feel like as creatives, people who are creative, and we'll talk about what that term creative actually means a little more, but I feel like a lot of times you struggle to find that anchor,
Hmm.
right? That what anchors all of it together. And if you don't find that anchor, you tend to be blowing in the wind. I know there's a lot of creatives out here who are blowing in the wind because they don't have that anchor point or what I call that through point or that through line that connects all of those things that they're interested in. So it's interesting that you said that you have found that anchor. Now, how long did it take you to realize that that was your anchor? Like, have you always thought of it that way? That everything you do stems from your relationship with God and your ability to worship God, or has that's been a new revelation for you?
I feel like I've always had a crazy love for God. We've always had a really special relationship. And this is why the distinction between being a singer and being a worshiper are not necessarily the same, because this was before I started singing. Um, so I've always had like a special place in my heart for just, I don't know, like just a God sized hole type thing. And so for me, once I started to become a creative and start venturing into different roles in my life, it's just a through line for me. It's something that has just exist. It wasn't something I made a choice to bring with me or not bring with me. It's a part of me, if that makes sense.
Mm. What is it? We might as well jump on into this term creative. What does it mean to you to be a creative?
I think that's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever answered that question, but
We got an
I think
exclusive.
creative is it can be many things. I don't even know if being a creative can be defined, because I think people express their creativity in different ways. You know what I mean? I think the traditional way of looking at a creative is something in entertainment industry. Um, but that's not true. Like, you can be a creative and you can be a pottery person, or you can be a creative and be an architecture, be in architecture. It can just, anything that I think that is outside of the norm, I think makes you a creative.
Yeah, it's kind of what I wanted to get to because I think, you can be creative in any endeavor. And I personally think that the term is overutilized a lot, and it can come across as marginalizing people who aren't in the creative arts per se. That
Exactly.
to your point, you can be an architect or you can be an engineer and be just as creative as someone who's
100%.
outside of that traditional realm of
Yeah.
work.
Hmm.
So I kind of wanted to get to that point, but you consider yourself a creative in the artistry realm of
There's
things.
entertainment.
Um, yeah, have you always been into entertainment? I'm sorry. Have you always been into entertainment, or did you, when you were growing up, did you envision yourself being an entertainer on stage in front of
No,
people?
no, absolutely not. I was super introverted, super shy,
Mm.
and but my mom and my stepfather at the time was in the business. They were in the management side of things, and they did like shows and promoted what do you call it? Yeah, shows like for
Like
acts,
showcases?
showcases. That's exactly what it is. And so I was always around music and I was always around the entertainment business, but it wasn't focused on me. Um, we, as a family, we were introduced to like, that's what kind of where I get my musical palette. Like we listen to all kinds of music. We, loved the arts period. We love watching dancers and, listening to classical and just very wide, broad, view of the creative arts. And so we just liked it. So we went to a performing arts school. I actually thought I was going to be a dancer.
Mm.
It's so strange to say now, um, but
So what happened?
I was in dance class and I was in choir class because I just liked music. Um, but it was my middle school teacher who pointed it out. So she one day, and I still talk to her to this day, but one day she was like, "You in the back, the one that says, literally," she says, "the one that says nothing, come here." And she made me come to the front and she was like, "I need you to sing this for me." And she made me sing a solo. And she was like, how did I miss this? Have you been in my class all year? And I never knew you can sing like this. She was like,
Well,
"You have
she hadn't heard you sing before?
no," because it was a
Hmm.
choir. So it was like I just kind of blended in. She was like, "You just did a great job of blending in." Because again, I was super shy, introverted, and I had a lot of stuff going on at home. So this kind of, just existed really. So she figured it out and she was like, "You have an insane voice." And then she told my mom. My mom didn't know. No one knew. And so when my mom heard me, because she came to a showcase that we did at the school, she was like, "How?" Literally, just again, how did I miss this? How did I not know? She thought it was my sister because my sister's the extrovert of the both of us.
Mm.
So she was like, "You're talking about Tanisha." But anyway, long story short, once they found out I can sing, I didn't really have a choice in the matter. It was more like, "You're going to be a singer." That's
Now,
just,
is your sister older or younger than you?
she's a year older than me.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. Um, so you're an introvert naturally. Would
Naturally.
you would you say that? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to jump ahead of myself. There's so many things I wanna ask as it relates to that. Well, you said you didn't have a choice in the matter. Did you enjoy it initially, or when did you
It was
start to enjoy it? Because it sounds
slowly.
like it sounds like you were doing it because kind of you kind of pushed
People
into
please.
it.
Yeah. And the people pleaser. Yeah. Yeah. It I feel like I didn't really and start to enjoy singing until I really found out, like I started to discover who I was as a person and and as a worship leader, which is
Mm,
because I actually didn't sing gospel music as a career. I always was a pop artist from the beginning. Um, but I hated to sing in public. I enjoyed singing, but I didn't like singing in public. So because of the shyness, so I had stage fright, major stage fright, and then I was made to do like very uncomfortable things, like sing in the middle of a lobby at a hotel,
mhm.
to try to sing for somebody or try to get noticed. Like the 90s, it was a different it
Oh,
was
I got you.
a world.
Yeah.
So I was just doing things that were very, very uncomfortable for me. So I didn't really enjoy it until I got older, a lot older.
Yeah.
Um, it got more comfortable.
Now, would you say this desire, or I guess this comfort of wanting to blend in, has that gone away, or has that continued to follow you through your career? This sense of comfort or safety in blending in versus standing out. Particularly, it sounds like you went through a little bit of trauma as it pertains to having to be front and center and draw attention to yourself. I could see just from an outside viewpoint how that would give you the tendency, if you didn't already have it, the tendency to say, I don't, this is terrifying. I have trauma connected to being front and center and on stage and being in the spotlight. So I've got this talent, but maybe let me just blend in. Has
Yeah.
that continued to follow you? And if so, how'd you work through that, or have you overcome it?
Um, I feel like a it was, I say, because I don't feel that way anymore, but for a long, long time, I think up until really the pandemic, um,
Mm,
I warred with that on a regular basis. Like sometimes I'll be fully confident and in it and didn't have, because I was, you know, in my full self. And then there were other times where I was just like, yeah, I don't know. Like, and that idea of always wanting to be in the background, I've always been a person that was okay not being seen in any kind of capacity, not just creatively or like as a singer. I am the support system. I am the encourager. I'm the one that's just like everybody else can be before me, you know? And so in that way, 100% that was a through line in
yeah.
in my life and in my career. It showed up in different ways. Um,
Yeah, I could see how that would happen, and I think a lot of times there's personality types, right? Some people
mm,
have personalities that where they are more supportive, that they just tend to be that support system, and they don't care about being in the limelight. But then there are those people, as I was just saying, who they don't necessarily have a personality that wants them to be in the back or be in the background,
mhm.
but they've gone through something, and some experience has kind of led to them being more reclusive and more introverted, and it may be a combination of both. And I could see, again, as a adult professional in this industry,
Yeah.
and this is a little personal for me, because I had a relationship with my ex, the background singer, and I used to always be on her about, why don't you do your own thing? Why don't
Mm,
you should step out there, and you're great. Your voice is incredible. You're just as good as the people you're singing for. And she used to be like, no, that's not what I want to do. I'm not interested in that. And me, my psychoanalytical self, I was like, yeah, but is it though? It's you kind of want to do it. You're just afraid of it. So, but I'm always interested to talk to people to see where that connection is between, is that just your personality, or are you doing it, are you playing the background for some other reason?
I think
um
I think in my own journey of self-discovery, I think that it's a mixture of both. I think
mhm.
some of it is natural personality, but a lot of it was insecurity, feeling like I'm not as good as what I feel like is the best. Comparison, it is a silent killer. Um, and just the pressure of that was put on me to be this, star. And for me, my biggest issue was weight. I was a lot bigger back then, um and I can't even say, so when I first started when I was 13, I wasn't like, you know, as big as I got into when I got in my 20s, but I was being compared to Brandy and Monica, who were literally like tiny, tiny, tiny.
Mhm.
Um, and I've always been curvy girl, like my mom is Trinidadian, like I have her shape, all of that. So I've always had that. And
Oh, and this was back when, now it's in
I was
to
gonna say it
be.
wasn't in that,
Yeah, yeah.
like skinnier the better back then. And now it's in. But back then it just wasn't in. And so I was always being told to be on a diet. I was put on extreme diets. I was, told like you're too fat for this or you're too this. And so that subconsciously, and especially my natural personalities, I'm an empath. I take and absorb things really deeply. So I I take that and I'm carrying that, you know what I mean, for
Hmm.
years, and it really undergirds my life. And so depression happened, and then I got even, gained more weight. And so my journey with my own artistry has been such a kind of a war happening in my mind. And I feel like sometimes in the natural where it's like my gift is what propelled me to actually stay in the game. So it's like before, more than myself, like more than me having a desire to like do it, I feel like the gift God gave me made the room for me. It made the space for me. And so people heard it and they kept calling on it, if that makes sense. So I think if it was up to me, I probably would have quit a long time ago.
Hmm.
But because, thank God the gift he gave me stood out to the point of like, you can't really let this go.
It's so interesting that you say that because I do believe that we work against God's gifting oftentimes out of fear or misunderstanding of it, expectation that we either put on ourselves or other people put on us. Um, and this to me is how you know that God's hand is constantly on your life because even when you're in the act of trying to self sabotage,
Yes.
God is like, nah,
It's
I'm
so
not gonna allow you to do that because the gifting is not for you; it's for other people, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
And he showed me that your gift is bigger than your weight. Your gift is bigger than what people think is what you're supposed to, the perfect version of you that they think and they perpetuate onto you. You're bigger than that. I'm bigger than that, meaning God.
yeah,
God's
yeah,
bigger
yeah.
than me, and I have a hand on your life. So I'm going to pave the way that I have intended to pave. And he really has done that. I've definitely sabotaged a lot of it because of my way of thinking and my understanding of myself, what I believed of myself. That's why for me, I struggled with finding my authenticity and finding my creative lane as an artist because again, when you're a black girl, you're plus size, you're automatically put in a very narrow category. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you're Kelly Price, or oh, R&B, or gospel. And I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
not any of those things. Like, my favorite artist is Coldplay, and I like Celine Dion, and like, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? So it's like, but then at the same time, feeling like that was my only option. So
Mm.
journey of just like trying to find Sharon. Who am I? And then when I find it, can I fully stand in my truth, no matter what people are thinking? So that's been the biggest journey for me.
You said something. One of your quotes. I'm gonna read it. It says, "People can tell you all day how talented you are, but until you believe it yourself, that praise will remain hollow, leaving you with a constant need to prove yourself to people who already see you." And then you go on to say, "It's time to catch up to your own greatness. Remember, the only one late is you."
Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot to unpack in this. First of all, what prompted you to write this post? That was just this year that you put that out. What prompted that thought, and then what made you want to put it out there?
Well, recently I've been, I'm in finding myself finally living in my full authenticity. I feel like um, my therapist has been challenging to take more leaps and jump off more cliffs, which is so anti my personality. It's so anti everything I am because I like safety and comfort. And one of my biggest dreams and passions has been to help creatives with understanding the business side of their creativity. So, how to navigate, a myriad of things when it comes to having difficult conversations or how to ask for more money or, reading contracts and, not being mishandled and things like that. But then also, just encouraging creatives. Like I feel like we tend to carry things on a heavier, I don't know if it's heavier, but we have such a sensitivity because we have to give so much that it's hard to replenish. So we sometimes we don't know how to replenish. So I feel like for me, the coaching, the encouragement is something that I've always wanted to dabble into. And so recently I've just been changing my content a bit more to cater to that. And so that is from one of those posts. And for me, when I wrote that, it's just kind of my experience of people and even myself. Like there's been many people throughout the years that are like, oh my God, your music is amazing and you should be writing for film and TV, or you should be writing for this artist, or you should be, singing at whatever, doing Broadway, or, try acting. And recently I booked an audition and I filmed a commercial. Never in my wildest dreams, okay? In my wildest dreams have I ever thought that I was going to be on anybody's TV acting, okay? Never. But because I've been challenged to jump off the cliff, I did it, and I got the whole campaign. I got the print side, and I got the commercial. And then when I went on set,
Go.
the guy who directed the commercial was the guy who directed The Greatest Showman, and everybody on the set were just professionals. And they looked at me, was like, apparently, it wasn't until I got on set that I realized I was the lead, one of the main leads of the whole thing. And so then when I did my acting, everybody was like, how is it exactly that you have never done this before? Like, you're such a natural, like, you need to be out there. Like, you have a great look, and your acting is amazing. So from that, I was just like, this is a perfect example of like how oftentimes we have to catch up to our own greatness because we box ourselves in because of how we see ourselves. And until we see ourselves as vast and bigger and not so closed in and put into a box, can we experience God's greatness? Because I feel like we sabotage God's blessings because he's like, I want more for you, but it's not going to happen until you make the first step.
Absolutely.
So that post
Yeah.
really came from that.
Yeah, and I think I've talked about this, but this, it's been a saying probably now that we're in the social media age. People say this more than they've ever said it, but that comparison is a thief of joy,
Yeah.
right? And we get into this habit of comparing ourselves to people that we see. Now, before you compare yourself to people that you can come in contact with or touch, or maybe you compare yourself to people on TV, but now you can compare yourself to millions of people at a time because
Oh, man.
everyone's at our fingertips, right? Which creates this whole internal turmoil
Yeah.
with, are we good enough? Are we attractive enough? Are we smart enough?
Mhm.
All that stuff. And so you mentioned therapy. How long have you been in therapy, and do you think that's helped you kind of come to some of the realizations that you have at this
It
point?
is literally, I want to say, maybe the best thing outside of the surgery that I did, but the best thing that I've ever done. Like it has changed my whole worldview. It's changed the way I view myself, the understand
Mm.
people. It's made me more empathetic. It's made me more aware. Like it's just the best thing I've ever done. I
When you
started.
say when you say worldview, I'm sorry to cut you off, Sharon. When you say worldview, what does that mean
So
specifically?
for
How
me,
does it change?
like the way I feel like I viewed the world was just through a narrow lens. Like just even understanding how the world works because of my own insecurities. So everything was filtered through my lens. My lens was insecurity. My lens was, um, uh, again, being boxed in. My view was as an artist, like I can't be famous unless I'm this size. I can't be. I'm only a singer. I'm only a songwriter. Just in general, like it was just a very narrow view of life.
Mm.
And she's helped me, her name is Mercedes Kaufman. She's helped me just expand my mind to think bigger, to view things on a larger scale, to allow myself to expand bigger than I ever thought that I ever can imagine. So my world has just changed. You know,
Yeah.
the limit.
It's so crazy that I find it mostly amongst people who have a relationship with God, or at least proclaim to have a relationship with God, that they need to take a step back and see the bigger picture and see their potential, and they don't trust it. And I said this. a few weeks ago, but or maybe a few months ago. I said that it's impossible, in my estimation, for a divine creator, which I believe I was created by a divine creator, to create something that is not in itself divine.
Mm-hmm.
So if you believe that you are created by God and purpose to fulfill whatever He's called you to do, then there's a piece of that divinity in you.
Yeah.
And so when you talk to people who are believers but still look at themselves as less than in certain instances, it it's it shouldn't be shocking to me, but I think sometimes it still is. But there's a myriad of reasons why you find yourself in those situations. So, and I think therapy's good if for nothing else, and to have someone who has an objective viewpoint on your
Mm-hmm.
situation, because sometimes I call it standing too close to the elephant. Like you don't really realize it's an elephant if you're up against it. All you see this wall of gray. It's not until you take a step back and you see the bigger picture that yeah, I have you ever heard of this? I call it the mirror exercise, where the goal is to stand and look at yourself in the mirror with intent. We
Mm-hmm.
look in the mirror every day, whether it's brushing your teeth,
Yeah.
shave, makeup, whatever, but not many of us look with intention. Yeah, we're trying to really have an intentional encounter with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And what I challenge people to do is see how long you can stand in the mirror and look at yourself before you become uncomfortable. You
Mm-hmm.
want to avert your eyes or avert your attention.
Yeah.
Ideally, you do it in a full length mirror, completely nude, but you don't have to. You can do it however you want to do it. And you start to realize that you don't really know yourself. And if you know
Mm-hmm.
yourself, you're not comfortable with yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
the that energetic exchange that's coming back at you.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I did it, it took me maybe 10 seconds before I wanted to avert my attention before I felt uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to think, well, if I'm uncomfortable with myself after 10 seconds, how can I expect other people to be comfortable with
Yes.
me? Right.
Like,
So it's interesting that you say that, but to have that sounding board, I think is very important when it comes to
yeah.
therapy.
Awareness. Uh,
Hmm.
you've probably done your own research. You probably a person that maybe doesn't have to um, or challenge yourself to not be in a box. You know what I mean? Like you want to understand other ways of the world or other belief systems and other modalities and stuff like that. So that makes sense for you to be that or to have that thought process. But a lot of people, especially people in church, are also very narrow minded,
Hmm.
narrow in their perspective. And so everything uh, comes from church. And as we know, church is it shouldn't be the building, but a lot of times people make it a building and about the ceremonies and the rituals and the pastor and the leaders. So they default to their pastor. So their pastor becomes their God. And then their pastor is a reflection of them. So it's like they make I feel like a lot of times leaders put out this energy that they're supposed to be relied on. So then the focus is off of,
Hmm.
you know what I'm saying? So there's no way to understand that concept of, oh, God is big, so I'm a part of God. God makes me, you know what I'm saying? Like I think it's a big disconnect when it comes to how believers think.
It brings me to this other thing you posted. This is not your post, but you reposted something that Jabari Johnson posted.
Oh yeah.
And he says he's sitting here thinking how mind-blowing it is that numerous worship leaders and musicians have no covering, but are expected to perform regardless of their life's challenges. And the moment their imperfections are revealed, they're discarded as if their impact never mattered. Now he goes on to say a few other things, but I kind of want to stop right there. um, you've been a worship leader, and sang in choirs, and has some of this kind of interaction with leaders in church deterred you from singing, as a worship leader, or continue to sing in choirs? How has that impacted you, or has it impacted you at all, your interaction with some church leaders?
Yeah. So my journey has been interesting. I feel like I've been really blessed in my church experiences. It wasn't until last year that I had some back blows with some ministries that I was a part of that I was like, oh, so this is what you guys are talking about when it comes to church hurt. And I was so and the reason why it's so detrimental is because it comes from the place you think is supposed to be the safest, right? Or the person that you think is supposed to be a part of your safe community, which is your leader or your pastor. Um, so, yeah, it is this. I feel like it's a perpetual discarding of the people who are serving your ministry. We're really serving God, but we're serving it through by serving your ministry and helping out in that regard to bring the gospel to the people. But I think that that gets so convoluted, and it becomes about, again, the leader and about what serves him and about what makes their church better. You know what I'm saying? Because of the numbers, or what it looks like aesthetically, and it becomes less and less about God. So then the people and the relationships they don't exist. You know what I'm saying? Because it's
Hmm.
about pastoring anymore. It's about taking, what can I get? How can you serve me? How can you make my ministry look better? You're a great talented person, so people come here for the music, because the reality is this, and people don't like to talk about it. Like, sure, people come for the word, but a lot of times, and then this has been my experience, like I can't count, I can't even think of how many times people come into me in the street and been like, I joined this church because of you. I came
Mm.
to God because of your worship. And I don't take that personally, because it's absolutely not me. But what I'm saying is people are attracted to music. That is a universal language inside of church and outside of church. So the drawing of like the music ministry is huge. So you want your best musicians, you want the best singers, all of that. So you can use them to make your ministry sound good or look good, but there's no investment in the actual people behind these gifts. And
Yeah.
so we're going through it. We have challenges, we have frustrations, we go through life just like everybody else. But it's like, because we're leaders, who's serving us? And a lot
That's
of
right.
pastors miss the ball on that.
First of all, I think leadership, uh, there's a such thing as a term called servant leadership, but I think all leadership should be servant leadership.
Mhm.
True leaders understand that they serve the people that quote unquote report to them. That's first of all.
Yeah.
But also, I think this is a word to the wise for people who are doing something, using their gifts, and they've connected their gift to their purpose, and they connected their purpose to God, and then they get into whatever the profession is or the career is, and then they start to connect that gift to that person or whoever that leader is,
Mm-hmm.
and that is never going to end the way you want it to end, because people are people, right? We're humans. And if you start doing it for anything outside of God, anything, whether it's for the stage, whether it's for the attention, whether it's for the money, whether
Yeah.
it's for the approval of the leader, it's always, 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 always going to end bad, because no man and no woman can hold the mantle of that expectation to make you feel validated for what it is that you do, your gift. And to no fault of our own, sometimes we get into these situations and we seek the validation of people, uh, because this person is someone who we look up to. This person is someone who we hold in high regard or high esteem, and we seek that validation. And I'll often say that validation is the counterfeit to vision,
Mm.
right? Like sometimes we substitute our vision for validation. Like
Yeah.
we'd rather have that validation than fulfill the vision that God has implanted in our hearts. And it specifically happens a lot of times in church, but it happens in all forms of industry,
Yeah. I
whether
was,
that be entertainment, whether that be your regular corporate 9 to 5. The need and desire to be validated by a human is a deep flaw, I think, that most of us have.
that's a challenging thought. Yeah, because I don't necessarily think validation necessarily is a bad thing. I think it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it can be placed in the wrong, like you can have the wrong perspective of validation. I think everybody deserves and needs to be told you're doing a good job. I think, you're talented. It builds confidence. It makes somebody feel seen. It's really going back to, everybody wants to feel seen, and be heard and feel like that's all validation. So I don't think there's anything, I think that's a human nature to want to be validated to a certain extent. But when it's misplaced and put on one person or put on a group of people, and to the where it's like it takes away from you if these people don't validate you, I think that's where it becomes
Well,
toxic.
yeah, I mean, it gives away your power, right? I think, validation to your point, everyone needs to be validated just like everyone needs their house built on foundation, right?
Yeah,
But you can build your house on rock or shaky foundation. Like you can still have a foundation, but it not be sustainable. And I think
yeah,
anytime you invest that much that much emotional capital in what another person is saying about your gift that they did not give you,
yeah,
the only true validation can come from the person or the entity that gave you the thing that you're seeking validation for,
hmm,
because no one else is going to fully understand it, right?
yeah,
Even there may be portions of it that they understand, that they get, that may fit what they are wanting to do, and they can validate that portion of it. But even that, the moment you do something that is outside of what they expect of you,
yeah,
then the validation goes away. And so anytime you invest that much emotional capital in what another person is saying about your gift that God gave you, they
hmm,
can take that away from you at any time. And
1000%.
then we get into the situation that you and I talked about, that you get so hurt that you go into this place of unforgiveness.
Yeah,
And now you're carrying around this burden of unforgiveness because you've allowed someone to pull the validation away from you. And
so
now you're upset about go
do you
yeah.
that it's are you saying when it comes to particularly what we're talking about when it comes to like people in church or whatever when they get church hurt,
Yeah.
do you think it's the result of them wanting to be validated?
No, not all the time. I think sometimes uh, people are just not good people all the time, and I think that can be a part of it. I think also people are flawed,
Hmm,
right? And so they sometimes do things out of ignorance.
yeah,
They don't understand what impact is going to have on people. They may not even understand that they've done a thing, right?
hmm,
Because oftentimes there's a miscommunication when we talk
yeah,
about church hurt, not just in church, but when you have disputes or disagreements between two people. A lot of times it's because one person heard something one way, the other person heard it the other way. The expectations are set based on what you thought you heard, and there's no clarity in really what the conversation was about. And then you get so angry and frustrated that you ostracize one another, and there's no overlapping conversation. You can't revisit that conversation. The relationship's burned for miscommunication. So there's a myriad of reasons why people have quote unquote church hurt. But I
yeah,
think it does happen sometimes too. You have an expectation that this person is going to consistently validate you.
hmm,
And then oftentimes it's not that they don't even validate you. They just don't validate you in the way you expect it to come,
hmm,
right? They don't verbally praise you. They don't praise you in front of people. They're not consistent with the validation. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she's younger than me, and she's working a corporate job. And I asked her one day how it was a new job. I was asking her how the job was going, and she said to me, she said, "Oh, it's been okay." I was like, "Well, why just okay?" She said, "Well, my boss just hadn't talked to me this week," and I'm thinking, it's a good thing. If your boss doesn't talk to you all week, like you keep doing what you're doing. You haven't done anything wrong. But in her mind, she needed that constant feedback loop. She wanted to constantly, because she said, she usually asks me how my day goes. And she's been all week and she hasn't asked me how my day was.
yeah,
And that level of validation she expected, whereas her boss may not have seen that as an issue. Like, I don't need to validate you. You're doing fine. Keep doing what you're doing.
yeah,
And so I think sometimes it's just the expectation of one person may not match with the expectation of the other person. There's multiple reasons. I'm just saying that validation itself, because it's so, to your point, so fundamental to who we are as humans. It's our first human need to be needed,
yeah.
right? Uh, and when you seek that outside of yourself and outside of God, just know that you're putting it on shaky ground potentially.
A
There's not,
hundred.
yeah,
It's like I said, when it's misdirected and you're pulling on someone in a godlike space,
yeah.
that's when it's that's when it's detrimental for you. I was listening to Jay Shetty, of course, today, and he had this quote that said, "I am who I think you think that I am." And I say, "Huh."
I am who you think. Say that again.
So he said, "I am who I think you think that I am." So
I
pretty
am.
much what I think that you think that I am, that's what I think that I am. So whatever I think your perception of me is, that's how I see myself. So
And
depending
he was saying that. I hope he was saying that as if that's not where you're supposed to be. That's not a healthy place to be. Okay. Okay.
human experience, like when talking about validation. So depending on who we honor or who we see in a high regard, we usually perceive ourselves from the perspective of who we see higher than ourselves, pretty much.
Mhm.
And how that is always like a tricky line because wisdom is great. Seeking you know, clarity from somebody who you feel like has been there before you or is great. But when it comes to a point of like, I only can see myself through your lens, and that will make or break you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, people do that. And that goes back to kind of what I was saying with the mirror exercise. It's how much time do we really spend getting to know ourselves?
Yeah. It's huge,
Um, it's
huge.
huge. We spend so much time and effort and energy investing into other people, getting to know other people, figuring out who other people are, that of course we're gonna look through their lens to get a perspective on who we are instead of sitting down and saying, well, who am I and how do I feel about myself?
Yeah.
Uh, but and I said this on the last episode that the journey of self discovery is the most daunting and most avoided journey
So
that we have. You know, it's so much easier to sit down and get to know someone else than it is. Honestly, the reason I started doing a solo podcast was a lot of it was for me to really dig deeper into who I am, right?
yeah.
And not always have someone to banter with and
Mhm.
bounce things off of because that's challenging at times just to sit with yourself and your thoughts and figure out who am I? What do I want? What do I need? What do I desire? And where do those desires and needs emanate from? So I totally agree with that.
I think that for me, that when I'm talking about the pandemic, that's kind of when my life kind of shifted in a drastic direction in multiple ways. But it was the first time I feel like the world was forced to stop. You know, we were forced to be still. And a lot of people didn't take that well. A lot of
Yeah,
people take that well because it was like, I have to sit with myself. I have to think about the things that I'm actually perpetuating in my mind. I've been ruminating about. I have to look at what my life has become, what part I had to play in it. You know what I mean? Like what you just ask yourself all these hard questions. It's like kind of impossible. It's too quiet not to. And so for me, it was I loved honestly the pandemic because I actually I'm big on self reflection. And it
mhm,
wasn't until I met my therapist, though, that she gave me direction in my self reflection. Because I think sometimes you can self reflect and then you can kind of like beat yourself up. You know what I mean? And you can be really like really hard on yourself. And I should have done this and live with regret and shame and all of that. There has to be a balance with that. It's like, okay, I can do this better. I can be a different version of myself. But there's also, I can only do the best with what I had. You know what I'm saying? Like I was only operating out of the best version of myself at the time. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's
yeah.
all things, but being somebody who is self-reflective and just thinks about, how they can be better, I think is everything.
Well, and I think that gets back to kind of what we were talking about. I think it's easier also to place blame on other people than to shift some of that blame over to yourself.
Mhm.
Whereas you have to find that you got to find that balance between accepting responsibility but not getting so steeped in shame and regret that
Yeah.
you go into a shell.
Yeah.
Because what the opposite of that is placing blame, right? You start to place blame on other people and invest in other people and say you need to fix this, you need to do this better, you need to come
Yeah.
through for me. And it's like, well, what are you doing for yourself? And
Hmm.
and you and I have talked about this topic of unforgiveness. And I think you sent me the lady may have been on Jay Shetty's podcast, but where someone had said that she didn't think, and I'll butcher it. I'll let you tell kind of what she said or give the overview of what she said. But you sent that post to me about unforgiveness and wanted to get my insight on it. Do you remember what she was
Or which
saying?
post that
Well,
was?
she was saying that she thought she didn't think everyone that you should forgive. Uh,
Oh, right. Yeah, that was an interesting post. Super,
yeah,
because I think some people believe that. Some people believe that they don't, the other person doesn't have, like, they don't, I don't even know if it's about the other person. I think she was just saying, like, I'm not going to force myself to be somewhere that I'm not. And so I don't need to forgive if I don't really feel like forgiving. And then also for her, she said she was in a narcissistic relationship. And we know, like, although it's such a hot topic now, but there's actual narcissists that are like clinical narcissists, that it's like a completely different world. Like, you are subjected to their control, you're manipulated. Like, it's a horrible relationship. You come out of it feeling like the worst of yourself. You're insecure, you're all of the things, right? And she was saying, like, I got out of that. And so you made me think all of these horrible things about myself, how I saw myself and all these things. She was like, I'm not giving you forgiveness. And I mean, it's interesting. It's
yeah. Well, when you said that, the first thing I thought is, even when you said now, to say I'm not giving you forgiveness. Well, you're not. You're not giving the other person forgiveness as much
yeah.
as you're, forgiving them for you, right? So you can free yourself of that anger because unforgiveness and anger are inextricably attached, right?
Mhm.
So if you're unforgiving, you're angry, and
Yeah.
that anger festers and manifests itself in different ways inside your own body.
Hmm.
And that's when I used to not understand when people say, yeah, not forgiving people is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I think that's a Nelson Mandela quote,
It's a
where he
very,
said, yeah. So and I didn't really comprehend it until I understood that unforgiveness was inextricably attached to anger. And I
mm,
know what anger does internally for you. It manifests in all of your relationships. It manifests in how you deal with yourself, even. And so, to get rid of that anger, you have to get rid of the unforgiveness. They're connected. All right. I don't know any person who's harboring some sort of unforgiveness that is not attached to a certain level of anger towards that person or that situation.
and
Um,
the root of anger is really sadness and pain. Like, that is the
that's
deep
right.
of anger. And so it's like you're still in pain. You're still
That's
struggling. So it's like you may think like you're empowered by it, but you're actually really in pain still, because you, like you said, the root of unforgiveness, it's trickling down. It's anger, and then it goes to sadness. So it's like you're really you're living an unresolved life and
that's
experience.
right.
You're sabotaging your own, journey to a certain extent, because I believe in filters. We all have different filters, and you can have a filter of love, or you can have a filter of hate. You can have a filter of forgiveness or unforgiveness. Like, filters are what drives your life. Filters are what you make your decisions through. So if you're somebody who's a pessimistic person, that is your filter. So for me, I think you're right. Like, forgiveness, there's no way around the benefits of forgiving, and it is for you. So that
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela quote, I 100% agree with, because you're sabotaging your own self. Because, like you said, I read that there's a book, I think we talked about it, but When the Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if we ever talked about that.
I don't think so.
Incredible, amazing book. By this psychologist, but he talks about how trauma shows up in your body, and
Hmm.
you might not even know, because most times people don't know that they're living in a toxic experience. They don't know they're living out a toxic experience because it's so normalized for them. So
That's
it
right.
shows up in ways, in our in relational ways. It can show up in work ways. It can show up in the way we sabotage our own lives, and through addiction. It can show up in disease. It can show up in so many different ways, but it's going to show up if you don't deal with it.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
I wanna kind of pivot a little bit here. You talked a little bit about your experiences and how they kind of shaped your self esteem and your kind of your ability to perform or what do you want to do, what you wanted to do with your life and your career. I've done a little bit of research, and I hope you don't mind me talking about this.
Okay.
But you lost your father, right? And uh, I'm interested because I lost both of my parents. I'm interested to hear what kind of impact that had on you personally, but also maybe professionally. Already dealing with self esteem issues, and then I don't know what kind of relationship. So maybe you can tell me what kind of relationship you have with your father, and then what impact losing him had on.
It was a complicated one. It wasn't a close one at all. We didn't meet until I was in my 20s.
Oh wow, okay.
So yeah, it was a complicated relationship because he was someone who I just had no point of reference for. Like I didn't know him. Like he could have been a stranger on the street. That's how I felt
Mm,
when I first met him. But I was trying to be intentional about connecting and getting to know him. And getting to know him, I just realized he was a very broken man. Like just a very, very broken person. So like the way, again, talk about filters, the way it showed up in his life is just like he struggled all the time finding a job and keeping a job. And then come to find out, he had cocaine in his system when they found him. Like he had a heart attack, and so he was doing drugs. Didn't know that either. And we talked, every once in a while. And there was a time we were getting closer, but then he sabotaged that because it turned into him asking me for money every time we talked, and it was just like this. It started to become unhealthy. And for me, I had to place my own boundary with that. Um, but I grew to care about him for sure. So like when
mm,
he passed, it was just like it was heavy because it was a loss of the potential of what we could
mm,
have grown into being, you know what I mean? And hopefully getting his life together and becoming a healthier version of himself. Because I feel like every time we talked, it was that. Like he was like, you could be a therapist. You should just be a therapist. Because I was like, I feel like every time we talk, I feel like a better person and I just want to do more. And I'm like, yeah, I want that for you. But it's just he didn't want it for himself. So it was the loss of that, you know what I mean, for me. And just he was young, he was 50, I think he was 60 or 59. I think he was 59.
mm.
So
Yeah.
he had just had a kid.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so and so for me, it was just like, man, like this is a part of my DNA. I'm trying to do everything opposite to not,
Yeah.
have.
It's so interesting you said about giving him advice, right? I
Mhm.
was talking to Rashad Browning on one of these episodes, and we were talking about how wealth and knowledge is all supposed to trickle down from your parents down to you. And when we flip that dynamic, a lot of us find ourselves in situations where we're either providing for our parents financially or providing wisdom or advice to the people who are supposed to be guiding us.
Yeah.
And I think when you flip that dynamic, you can see the impact of that it has on you.
It's
Did you have a father figure in your life growing up?
um technically
Tell
um
me about it.
technically there was a man in the house. No, there I was raised by my stepfather, which is my brother's father. My sister and I have the same mom and dad. And so he raised us, but you know, he was
I'm sensing there wasn't much of a.
he was not it was a very traumatic childhood. I'll just say that. Like it was just not good. He wasn't he had his own demons he was fighting, and unfortunately he took it out on us, the kids particularly. So
Mm.
abuse was a real thing in my life.
Physical, mental, emotional, all the above.
Yeah, all of the above, exactly, all of the above. So a lot of that self-esteem stuff,
Mhm.
how I viewed myself, just being nurtured and all of that, and just a father's love and how they see a girl. Like I did never experience any of those things. Um, so the answer is technically yes, but no.
Yeah, I often say that as important as it is for men to have their father, young boys to have their fathers, it's extremely important.
Yeah,
But the good thing about young boys is that you can have men who are close enough to you, whether it be an uncle or whether it be a coach or teacher or pastor, who can get close enough to you to not only put their arm around you and encourage you, but also discipline you when
yeah,
it's time for it. For young girls, there's not really a man who can get close enough
yeah,
without it being a little awkward and weird. And so you often have girls who grow up isolated from the idea, or isolated from the reality of manhood and connected to the idea of manhood. But unfortunately, that idea of manhood is often funneled through the filter of a mother who has been hurt by men. And
Mm.
so then you have this cycle repeated where you have women who have this view of men that comes from a place of pain, and they adopt that pain, and it's hard for them to then navigate relationships with men at times.
A
Uh,
thousand. I think for me, because again, naturally, what I was always a very soft heart, like lover, just shy. But
mhm.
I always wanted love and being insecure. I always sought after older men. And so
Makes sense.
yeah, so now I know, like, oh, that's why you I was always more mature for my age, not intentionally, just because I was always more mature for my age. And so, and I would figure wise, I looked older than I was, and so I just always attracted older men. Um, but it's interesting because that kind of ended when I was in my teens, and it kind of switched to wanting to save men. And
Mm,
now, it being in therapy, that was like a reverse thing, trying to like save my stepfather, you know what I mean? Like save our relationship by trying to fix a man, or the man that I ended up with, because he had a lot of this, some of the same traits that
yeah.
that he had. So it's like, proving myself and my worth through with a man.
It all comes back to that word we were talking about earlier, which is validation, right?
Yeah,
You seek validation from men who are older. That doesn't work. So let me find someone who's flawed and get validation that way. And validation again can masquerade around as multiple things, and sometimes it can masquerade around as love,
yeah,
because you feel validated for what you're doing or what you can offer a man, and they validate you, and that feels like love to you, but it's not really
that's
love. It's you're only validated as long as you can continue to do whatever they need you to do.
1,000%. Like it,
Yeah.
for me, it's interesting because, uh, well, I mean, anyway, it's interesting because with my, ex-husband or whatever, when we first met, I realized now I didn't have any requirements. All he had
Mm,
to do was say that he loved me and the way he came for me and how sold he was on me. First time ever in my life I had ever experienced that. That level of intensity of like, oh, you're it. That's it. There's no other woman I see. To me, I was like, oh my God, that's all I needed. But there were so many other requirements that I should have had that I just didn't, just because of the validation that was lacking so much,
yeah.
you
And
know?
also you hadn't taken the time at that point to know yourself well enough to know who you are. You put this quote up. This is another one I came across. It says, "Doubting your intuition because you prioritize someone else's voice over your own."
Hmm.
Um, and it sounds like you're saying this from experience, right? You doubt
Yeah.
you doubt your own, and your intuition it is your connection to God. It is God's voice,
Yeah.
right? And when it gets drowned out by prioritizing someone else's needs or desires, that's when you've gone off the path.
And yeah, I think sometimes, again, for me, manufactured into being naturally a people pleaser, but then also it's like by default, because there's such a lack in love and being seen and being heard, it's like you just want to please everybody so that you can be accepted. And
Mm,
so that's how it showed up for me. I became big people pleaser, codependent, and not knowing how to place boundaries where it needed to be. I way more comfortable in serving others than serving myself, to the point where it's like when I first met my therapist, she was like, "So how do you feel?" And at that time, I was in such a bad place, and I was like, I have no idea."
I don't know. Yeah, yeah.
And she was just like, "That's interesting." And she was like, "So pretty much what this says to me is that you're so used to pouring from an empty space that you're just numb to yourself. You have no idea what's going on inside of Sharon because you don't look inside of Sharon.
Mm,
You look at everybody else and you pride yourself to a certain extent, because that's a part of being a codependent. You pride yourself and you find your identity and your validation in what you can do for others.
Yeah.
Me, it's a, I'm so much better now with boundaries and stuff like that, but I still struggle with finding my significance sometimes if there's nobody to serve.
Mm.
So
Oh, that's so interesting. I think I try not to get too, biblical on this podcast, but when I talk about Jesus's relationship with the disciples, to me, it was a 3-year master class on leadership, right?
mhm,
He taught them how to serve, but before he taught them how to serve, he was telling them about who they are. He taught them who they
mhm,
are, and then when he left, he said, you're going to do greater works than me, and that was that empowerment. Because to your point, don't forget who you are, right?
yeah,
Yeah, your service is not connected. Yeah, you're here to serve people, but it's not connected to people. It's connected to me.
yeah.
And I think you have to understand that, or you do run the risk of going down that path where you're saying that I'm only good as long as I'm serving. And no, I'm always good. I'm here to serve, but I'm not connected to any human being. I'm connected to a greater power and a greater source.
And
Uh,
going back to our conversation before about church and religions, a lot of that also had to do with religion. So,
yeah,
for me in Christianity, selflessness, it's not, we're not meant to be selfish. We're supposed to be servants, and we're supposed to be die to ourselves, and, you know, put others first. Like that is the thing that you're told to be and do. And so when you want to please God also, and you're told that that's how you do it, you then become like this sacrificial lamb. And I think there's a lot of people in church who don't know and understand boundaries, don't understand how to distinguish like their intuition and their voice from whoever they serve. Because again, by default, it's like it's like even this suffer in silence thing, or like, it's like a part of the Christian experience is supposed to be suffering. So we take that, especially in our marriages and, relationships and marriages. It's like, oh, especially if you feel like God put it together. It's like, oh, well, I can't really push back on this because, this is my partner and I'm supposed to serve my partner. And, I'm finding flaws in myself. And so I can't say too much about that. It just becomes this thing where you just learn how to be a sacrificial lamb in every relationship that you're being, just for the sake that you think that you're supposed to do that as a Christian. If that
yeah. Well, no, it makes total sense, and I think Jesus said, "My yoke is light," right? And it's this idea that we're supposed to, in order to be a Christian, you have to suffer. Uh,
Yeah,
uh, if you believe in Christ, the suffering is done, right? Like he did the suffering for us, right? So I think, and then it goes back to this: who are we really serving? And if you believe, again, and going back to how you feel about yourself and the divinity within you and the divinity that which you're connected to, you can't allow yourself to be abused. And you said this earlier: pour from an empty cup. You can't allow yourself to be abused, because you then are no use to people. And so there comes a point in time where you have to understand, I'm here because God has me here. And if you're going to abuse me, then I'm not going to allow you to abuse me in my effort to serve, because God didn't call me to be abused. He did call me to serve, but not to be abused. And those aren't one and the same.
it
And
takes a certain level
yeah,
of knowing yourself, knowing your identity in Christ outside of
yeah,
your relationship with these people. Because again, a lot of people find their identity in the church that they serve.
that's right.
And a lot of times, especially in the Black community, the harder you are, um, it's like they feel like that the better it is. Like, so the more you condemn and the more you tell somebody how terrible they are, the better that they're going to become. Instead of the idea of love brings healing, right? So love, showing somebody love and grace and understanding and kindness will bring them closer to the experience of God, because that is God. Instead of telling them, "Oh, you're going to hell for this, you're going to hell for that," and it's like, I think it's like, okay, I was about to go into a different conversation, but Black community in general, especially Black church, it's just this harsh mentality. Everything is just, and I think that's that normalized trauma.
Hmm. That's
Trauma
exactly it.
intuition. And so that's all we know is
Yeah.
hard and heavy and rough and pulling and kicking and all of this screaming through life to try to get to the other side. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, and even that, even the things we talk about. And I say this is what people feel whatever way they want to feel about it, but our whole mindset oftentimes is getting to heaven, and we do that. We have so much focus on that we forget to live our life, right? We forget that if God wanted you in heaven, He'd have kept you there, and He wouldn't have sent you here. But you're here to
yeah.
live this life, not only to serve people, but also to experience the good things that this life has to offer.
Hmm.
And we don't do that enough. And to be fair, we've had, needless to say, a history of deep trauma, hundreds
Exactly.
of years of trauma, and all we knew was praising God in the midst of our suffering,
Yeah.
right? But there comes a point in time when God brings you out of a place, you can't consistently be trying to go back to that place. That's why the children of Israel
Yeah.
wander in the wilderness for 40 years when it was a 40-day trip or whatever, however long it was supposed to take them. It was because they were consistently trying, their mind was still attached to where they had just come out of. God saying, I brought you out of that not to keep you in this mindset of where you were. So I think we need to adopt
Uh,
some of that and take lessons from that. And it's no
yeah.
coincidence that there was 400 years of chattel slavery in this country and 400 years of
Yeah.
bondage in
There-
Egypt. But
I think that like the
again, that's a whole nother conversation for
I know.
another time.
So another
I
conversation.
feel I feel like we could talk for days, and I always feel this way. But we've talked for about an hour now, so I want to be conscious of your time. What I do want to, because you help creatives a lot, and we've obviously talked about a lot of things outside of just the creative genres. But if you could leave people with a few things, a few words of wisdom, if they are either struggling in their career, struggling with validation, struggling with finding purpose, or struggling with finding that anchor that we talked about. Like, what would you leave them with? A few things you could leave them with to help get them right on the right path.
I think I can only when I give advice, I give it from my own experience.
Yeah.
So for me, I think the shift happened when I was forced to be still. I think people are uncomfortable with being still. I think
Hmm.
stillness makes, like I said earlier, like makes everything else louder. Um, but I think stillness causes us to be able to hear a bit clearer, to understand ourselves a bit more, to listen to our inside voice, to listen to God, to listen to our intuition, to feel deeper. I think we have the closer we can get to our authentic self, the better we'll be in every field that we want to pursue, whether it's creative or not. So for me, identifying who you are, being okay with that, accepting that, and being able to live in your full truth authentically is the beginning of healing. And then out of that space, then you can start seeking and I mean for me it was therapy. For somebody it can be something else, but just start digging a bit deeper into like why you are the way you are, why you
Hmm.
think the way you think, how why do I keep perpetuating the same cycles, why do I keep doing the same things, asking yourself some of the hard questions, so that you can undo some of the learned traumas and the learned unproductive ways that we live our lives out. And then you can start to live in more freedom. So for me, being still, and then finding someone who can help you and guide you into your full healing, I
I
think is
love
the
it.
yeah thing for you.
I absolutely love it. This has been a great conversation.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on to talk to me. I'm sure this is going to bless some people. Uh, so I'm excited to see the impact of this episode. So I
Thank you.
appreciate you, and let us know where we could find you on social media.
Everything is under my name, Sharon Youngblood. Yeah, so Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok.
Got
Uh,
it. We'll link everything in the wherever this is posted. So
okay.
Sharon, I appreciate you.
Thank you. Justin.
And before we sign off, I always say this, that I truly believe this, for this time, while we're wrapped in this skin, that we will be, if we choose it to be so, the very best of God.
Mm.
So I thank you again for joining me, and you have a good rest of the evening. That's a wrap for this episode, pun intended. I want to thank you for joining us. We hope that you learned something about yourself. Hopefully you heard something that you had otherwise never thought of in that way. We welcome your comments. Please share, subscribe, talk about this with your friends. Our goal is to talk next time about something that you want to hear specifically. So comment, message us, email us, let us know what you want to hear, what you want us to talk about, what you thought about this episode, and we'll catch you next time. That'll be good.